Where Eagles Dare, 1968, sent its characters into one of the deadliest missions ever put on film: frozen mountains, hidden identities, and death waiting at every turn. But the real danger didn't stay on screen. Years later, the actors behind that mission faced lives marked by tragedy, exile, illness, and quiet disappearances. Join us as we uncover who they really were and honor the legacies they left behind. Richard Burton as Major John Smith. Major John Smith, the British intelligence officer in Where Eagles Dare, was portrayed by Richard Burton. At 43 years old, he gave the film its intellectual gravity, turning Smith into the calculating mind that held the mission together. The character's calm authority balanced deception, danger, and moral ambiguity, making him far more than a conventional war hero. Born Richard Walter Jenkins on November 10, 1925, in Pontrhydyfen, Wales, Burton's childhood was marked by loss and instability. His mother died when he was only 2 years old, leaving him in a household dominated by a volatile, alcoholic father. Violence and fear were common, and affection was scarce. Language became his refuge, first Welsh poetry, then Shakespeare, offering escape from a home that never felt safe. That hunger for emotional intensity carried into adulthood and shaped his relationships. Burton married Elizabeth Taylor twice, in unions defined by obsession, jealousy, and public collapse. Their love was legendary, but so was the damage it caused. He married 5 times in total, yet stability always slipped away. As the years passed, his body paid the price. Burton struggled with severe alcoholism, chain-smoking up to 4 packs a day, while battling chronic pain and exhaustion. His once commanding voice became rough, his health fragile, and hospital visits frequent. Doctors warned him repeatedly, but the habits that dulled his anxiety also accelerated his decline. Burton died at 58 years old on August 5, 1984, from a cerebral hemorrhage, late at night in Geneva, Switzerland. He was buried in Séligny, with a volume of Dylan Thomas poems placed in his coffin. His estate was estimated at around $4.6 million, a sobering contrast to the cultural weight he left behind, sealing the story of a man who burned brilliantly but briefly. Clint Eastwood as Lieutenant Morris Schaffer. Lieutenant Morris Schaffer, the American Ranger in Where Eagles Dare, was played by Clint Eastwood. At 38 years old, he shaped Schaffer into the film's physical anchor, a man whose silence carried lethal efficiency. The role quietly confirmed that Eastwood belonged at the center of the screen. Born on May 31, 1930 in San Francisco, California, Eastwood grew up amid instability during the Great Depression. His family moved frequently as his father searched for work, leaving little emotional grounding. That discipline hardened into self-control, a trait that would define his career. Rather than personal collapse, Eastwood channeled that control into work. After global fame from Sergio Leone's westerns, he expanded his range with films like Dirty Harry and later reshaped himself behind the camera. As a director, Unforgiven and Million Dollar Baby earned him 4 Academy Awards, proving longevity could coexist with artistic relevance. Health never overtook him as it did many of his peers. The death of his father pushed him toward strict routines, physical discipline, and relentless productivity. By avoiding addiction and excess, Eastwood extended his creative lifespan, continuing to direct and act well into old age, becoming an anomaly in Hollywood's history. In 2026, Eastwood is 96 years old, 2026 minus 1930, alive and largely withdrawn from public life. He no longer works at the pace he once did, but his legacy remains dominant. With an estimated net worth of $375 million, he stands as the stark opposite of Burton, proof that endurance, not intensity, can be the most shocking ending of all. Michael Hordern as Admiral Rowland. Admiral Rowland, the unyielding senior officer in Where Eagles Dare, was portrayed by Michael Hordern. At 57 years old, he brought to the film a gravity that anchored the chaos of war, giving the mission moral weight rather than spectacle. His presence didn't dominate the screen, but it steadied it, reminding audiences that authority in war often speaks quietly. Born on the 3rd of October 1911 in Berkhamsted, Hertfordshire, Michael Hordern grew up in comfort, shaped by discipline rather than struggle. His father served as an officer in the Royal Indian Navy, and his early years were structured, educated, and orderly. At Windlesham House School and later Brighton College, he gravitated toward performance through Gilbert and Sullivan operas, discovering that his voice and restraint carried more power than flamboyance. In 1943, he married Eve Mortimer, and together they built a long, complex marriage that endured strain. His affair with actress Coral Browne in the 1950s fractured their relationship, leaving emotional scars that never fully healed. When Eve suffered a fatal stroke in 1986, the loss devastated him, burdened by guilt and the weight of unresolved past choices. In his later years, illness replaced applause. By the early 1990s, Hordern suffered from chronic kidney disease and required regular dialysis, a slow and exhausting decline that confined him physically but not mentally. Even as his body weakened, his legacy remained immense, defined by towering performances such as King Lear, 1975, and the haunting television classic Whistle and I'll Come to You. Michael Hordern died on the 2nd of May, 1995, at the age of 83 in Oxford, England, from kidney failure. He was remembered as one of Britain's greatest classical actors, leaving behind an estimated net worth of around $1 million, earned slowly across a lifetime of discipline rather than fame. Mary Ure as Mary Ellison. Mary Ellison, the female operative in Where Eagles Dare, was portrayed by Mary Ure. At 35 years old, she brought emotional fragility and quiet intelligence to a film dominated by masculine force. The role stood as one of her last major appearances before everything unraveled. Born Eileen Mary Ure on February 18, 1933, in Glasgow, Scotland, she grew up in a stable, educated household as the daughter of a civil engineer and a homemaker. Her childhood lacked visible trauma, but it was shaped by discipline and expectation. Educated at the independent Mount School in York, she showed early spiritual and theatrical promise, famously portraying the Virgin Mary during the 1951 Festival of Britain. Even then, she chose instinct over security, turning down a prestigious radio scholarship to pursue the stage. Adulthood brought emotional turbulence, rather than fulfillment. Her marriage to playwright John Osborne began in passion and ended in betrayal, followed by another intense union with actor Robert Shaw, marked by volatility and dependence. These relationships blurred love, ambition, and pain. Motherhood deepened her internal conflict as her private world grew increasingly fragile. As the 1970s approached, deterioration became impossible to hide. Ure developed severe alcohol dependence alongside mounting mental health struggles. Missed cues, emotional breakdowns, and professional dismissals followed, culminating in her removal from major stage productions. Mary Ure died at 42 years old on April 3, 1975, from an accidental overdose of alcohol and barbiturates, discovered by her husband in their London home, only hours after a triumphant stage opening. Her estimated net worth was around $500,000, earned through decades of work, leaving behind a legacy defined as much by brilliance as by unbearable loss. Robert Beatty as Brigadier General George Carnaby. Brigadier General George Carnaby, the calm authority at the center of Allied command in Where Eagles Dare, was portrayed by Robert Beatty. At 59 years old, he brought measured confidence to the role, grounding the film's chaos with a voice that suggested trust, experience, and strategic certainty. His presence framed the mission as something larger than any one man. Born on the 19th of October, 1909 in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, Beatty's early life followed a steady academic path rather than hardship. Educated and disciplined, he earned a university degree before committing fully to acting, a decision that led him across the Atlantic to Britain just as Europe stood on the brink of war. Marriage and family life remained largely private and stable. Beatty married Dorothy Steele and became a father, maintaining a reserved personal world that contrasted sharply with the public intensity of his professional life. His career began in 1939 and expanded rapidly during World War II, when his voice became as important as his face. He reported eyewitness accounts of the London Blitz for the BBC, narrating destruction as it happened. On screen, he balanced authority with humanity in films like San Demetrio, London, 1943, and later appeared in landmark works including 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968, released the same year as Where Eagles Dare. Robert Beatty died on the 3rd of March, 1992 in London at the age of 82, reportedly from pneumonia. He was cremated at Putney Vale Crematorium, his end as quiet as his life had been composed. His estimated net worth at the time of death was around $700,000, closing the chapter on a man whose calm voice once carried the sound of war across continents. Patrick Wymark as Colonel Wyatt Turner. Colonel Wyatt Turner, the calculating Nazi officer in Where Eagles Dare, was played by Patrick Wymark. At 42 years old, he infused the role with intellectual menace rather than cruelty, making Turner chilling through calm authority instead of aggression. His performance added psychological tension, elevating the antagonist beyond a simple villain. Born Patrick Carl Cheeseman on July 11, 1926, in Cleethorpes, Lincolnshire, England, Wymark grew up in nearby Grimsby within a disciplined Catholic household. His youth was structured rather than harsh, shaped by formal education and wartime service. As a young man, he served as a midshipman in the Royal Navy during World War II, an experience that instilled order, restraint, and emotional reserve rather than trauma. Marriage offered stability where his career demanded constant movement. Wymark married playwright Alwyn Buck in 1953, and together they raised 4 children, including future actress Jane Wymark. As his marriage was happy, he became widely recognized through television roles in The Planemakers and The Power Game, winning the BAFTA TV Award for Best Actor in 1965. Film appearances such as Witchfinder General and Battle of Britain reinforced his reputation as a formidable character actor, even as he remained personally detached from fame. Patrick Wymark died suddenly at 44 years old on October 20, 1970, from a heart attack in his hotel room in Melbourne, Australia, just days before a major stage opening. He was buried at Highgate Cemetery in London following a Roman Catholic Requiem Mass. His estate was estimated at around $200,000, a quiet end for a man whose authority on screen far exceeded the brevity of his life. Donald Houston, as Christensen, the disciplined officer caught between duty and survival in Where Eagles Dare, was played by Donald Houston. At 45 years old, he embodied a hardened realism that reflected the cost of command, giving the character credibility rather than heroics. His performance blended authority with quiet fatigue, reinforcing the film's tension. Born on the 6th of November 1923 in Clydach Vale, Wales, Donald Houston's childhood was marked by loss and instability. His mother died at just 29, leaving him and his brother to be raised by their grandmother while their father left Wales in search of work. Before acting ever became possible, Houston worked in a coal mine, carrying physical hardship long before stepping onto a stage. In 1949, he married Brenda Hogan, beginning a marriage that would last for the rest of his life. His family remained a constant as his career moved steadily, if quietly, forward. Thanks to it, he was focused on his career. After debuting in The Blue Lagoon, 1949, he became known for authoritative roles in films like The Longest Day, 1962, and later war dramas. Though he never received major awards, his reliability made him indispensable, especially in military roles shaped by his real service in the Royal Air Force during World War II. Donald Houston died suddenly on 13 October 1991 at the age of 67 while in Coimbra, Portugal, after suffering a stroke. He left behind a modest estimated net worth of around $300,000, reflecting a life of steady work rather than excess, and a legacy rooted in quiet professionalism rather than fame. Peter Barkworth as Berkeley, the cool-headed officer whose intelligence quietly shaped the tension in Where Eagles Dare, was played by Peter Barkworth. At 39 years old, he gave the character an air of controlled authority, making Berkeley feel less like a soldier and more like a strategist holding the mission together from the shadows. His restraint sharpened the danger rather than softening it. Born on the 14th of January 1929 in Margate, Kent, Barkworth grew up in Bramhall, Cheshire, in an environment that valued discipline and education. At Stockport School, his headmaster pushed him toward university, convinced he had the intellect for academia. Barkworth chose acting instead, a decision that quietly separated him from the safe expectations laid out for him. His private life followed a path that was rarely discussed publicly. Barkworth shared a long-term relationship with David Wynne Jones, choosing companionship over convention and never marrying. That choice shaped both his personal silence and his emotional reserve on screen. Professionally, his career grew steadily, rather than explosively. Beginning in 1952, he built a reputation for intellectual roles that mirrored his own temperament. He won 2 BAFTA TV awards, first in 1975 for Crown Matrimonial, then again in 1978 for Professional Foul, and later became widely recognized for Telford's Change, 1979, a series watched by millions, yet driven by quiet introspection. Peter Barkworth died on the 21st of October 2006 at the age of 77 in London, after developing bronchopneumonia following a stroke. His passing came quietly, without spectacle, much like the life he lived. He left behind an estimated net worth of around $500,000, and a legacy defined not by fame, but by intelligence, restraint, and emotional honesty that lingered long after the screen went dark. Anton Diffring as Colonel Kramer. Colonel Kramer, the chilling embodiment of ruthless authority in Where Eagles Dare, was portrayed by Anton Diffring. At 52 years old, he infused the role with an icy precision that made Kramer terrifying without excess, turning every glance into a threat. His performance didn't shout cruelty, it whispered it. Born on the 20th of October 1916 in Koblenz, Germany, Diffring's early life was shaped by danger and contradiction. With a Jewish father and Christian mother, and living as a gay man in Nazi Germany, survival meant escape. He fled the country in the mid-1930s, only to be interned in Canada during the war, labeled an enemy despite running from persecution. His personal life remained guarded. Diffring was openly homosexual among close circles, but lived privately in an era that punished visibility. That lifelong need for caution echoed in the characters he played, men hiding emotion behind rigid control, power masking fear. On screen, he became synonymous with menace. British cinema repeatedly cast him as Nazi officers, roles that carried bitter irony for a man who had fled Hitler's Germany. Films like Circus of Horrors, 1960, and Operation Daybreak, 1975, cemented his image, even as they narrowed the roles he was offered. The face that gave him work also trapped him. Anton Diffring died on the 19th of May, 1989, at the age of 72 in Châteauneuf-Grasse, France. Officially, cancer was cited as the cause, though later accounts spoke of complications related to AIDS. He was buried in White Colney, Essex, far from the country he fled and the roles that defined him. His estimated net worth was around $400,000, closing the story of a man forced to play the very monsters he once escaped. Ferdy Mayne as General Rosemeyer. General Rosemeyer, the calm, aristocratic authority anchoring the Nazi command structure in Where Eagles Dare, was played by Ferdy Mayne. At 52 years old, he brought an unsettling elegance to the role, making Rosemeyer feel dangerous precisely because he never raised his voice. His presence gave the film a chilling sense of order behind the violence. Born on the 11th of March 1916 in Mainz, Germany, Mayne's childhood was defined by fear and separation. Born into a Jewish family, he was sent alone to England in 1932 to escape the tightening grip of Nazi persecution. His parents were later interned in Buchenwald, and survival depended on fragile international connections, leaving permanent emotional scars that followed him into adulthood. His personal life carried its own fractures. Mayne married Deirdre de Peyer in 1955, and together they had a daughter, Belinda. The marriage eventually collapsed, ending in divorce in 1972. Another quiet rupture in a life shaped by displacement and loss rather than stability. His career, which began in earnest in 1943, often mirrored his past. He became known for playing refined yet menacing figures, most memorably Count von Krolock in The Fearless Vampire Killers, 1967, where charm masked predation. In Where Eagles Dare, that same restraint became lethal, reinforcing his reputation for roles built on psychological threat rather than spectacle. In his later years, Mayne developed Parkinson's disease, a cruel contrast for an actor once defined by control and precision. He died on the 30th of January, 1998 in London at the age of 81. His estimated net worth at the time of his death was around $600,000, closing the life of a man who survived history's darkest chapter, only to spend his career portraying its shadows. Derren Nesbitt as Major von Hoppen. Major von Hoppen, the relentless Gestapo officer whose suspicion drives paranoia throughout Where Eagles Dare, was portrayed by Derren Nesbitt. At just 33 years old, he injected the character with volatile aggression, making von Hoppen feel younger, sharper, and more dangerous than his superiors. His intensity added a nervous pulse to the film's slow-burning tension. Born on the 19th of June, 1935 in London, Nesbitt did not face documented hardship in childhood, but ambition pushed him early toward performance. By the mid-1950s, he was already shaping a screen identity built around menace, control, and moral discomfort, traits that would define his career. His personal life, however, was turbulent. Nesbitt married 4 times, and his first marriage to actress Anne Aubrey ended violently. In 1973, he was fined after pleading guilty to assaulting her, a public reckoning that permanently stained his reputation. He later married 3 more times and became the father of 5 children, carrying personal chaos alongside professional success. Professionally, he leaned into darkness rather than escaping it. He made his mark as a predatory blackmailer in Victim, 1961, and continued carving out a niche as a sophisticated villain across film and television. In Where Eagles Dare, his commitment went so far that he sought out a former Gestapo member to understand the mindset, and he was injured on set when a squib explosion temporarily blinded him. As of 2026, Derren Nesbitt is 91 years old. He lives a quiet life, far removed from the violence of his screen persona, having returned to acting even late in life with unexpected roles such as Tucked, 2018. His estimated net worth is around $1 million, the complicated residue of a long career built on talent, controversy, and characters audiences loved to fear. Ingrid Pitt, as Heidi, the seemingly fragile agent whose loyalty and danger are never what they appear to be in Where Eagles Dare, was played by Ingrid Pitt. At 31 years old, she gave the character a deceptive softness that masked constant risk. Her presence destabilized the mission, reminding viewers that survival often depends on illusion rather than strength. Born on 21st November 1937 in Warsaw, Poland, Pitt's childhood was marked by terror long before she ever faced a camera. With a German-Russian father and a Polish-Jewish mother, she and her mother were imprisoned for 3 years in the Stutthof concentration camp during World War II. Their escape did not end the trauma. She spent years searching for her father through Red Cross refugee camps, growing up amid displacement, loss, and fear. Her adult life carried the same instability. Pitt married 3 times, first to American soldier Laud Rowland Pitt Jr., with whom she had a daughter, Stephanie, before the marriage collapsed. A second marriage to George Pinches ended in divorce, and only late in life did she find steadiness with writer Tony Rudlin, whom she married in 1999. Love, like safety, arrived late and never without scars. Her career, beginning in the mid-1960s, was shaped by roles that blended beauty with danger. She became a cult icon through The Vampire Lovers, 1970, and Countess Dracula, 1971. Performances that made her unforgettable yet also confined her to a genre that never fully rewarded her range. Fame followed, but lasting recognition always felt just out of reach. Ingrid Pitt died on the 23rd of November 2010, just 2 days after her 73rd birthday, from congestive heart failure in London. Years of illness had weakened her body long before the end came. She left behind an estimated net worth of around $800,000 and a life story far more harrowing than the dark fantasies she portrayed on screen. Neil McCarthy as Sergeant Jock McPherson. Sergeant Jock McPherson, the hulking, blunt force within Where Eagles Dare, was portrayed by Neil McCarthy. At 36 years old, he gave the character a physical and psychological weight that instantly separated McPherson from the rest of the team. His presence alone suggested danger, endurance, and a man built to survive violence rather than talk about it. The role added raw muscle to the film's carefully balanced tension. Born on July 26, 1932 in Lincoln, Lincolnshire, Neil McCarthy grew up in a structured academic environment. He was educated at Stamford School before studying modern languages at Trinity College, Dublin, training initially as a Latin and French teacher. This intellectual foundation stood in stark contrast to the imposing, intimidating figures he would later embody on screen. His acting career began on stage, moving through repertory theater, the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and the West End before transitioning to film. By the early 1960s, McCarthy had established himself as a formidable character actor, most memorably as Private Thomas in Zulu, 1964. By the time he appeared in Where Eagles Dare, he was already typecast as men defined by strength, authority, and silent menace. That image, however, was shaped by real physical hardship. McCarthy suffered from acromegaly, a hormonal disorder that caused abnormal growth and permanently altered his appearance. In later years, he was also diagnosed with motor neurone disease, a cruel neurological illness that progressively robbed him of movement and independence, mirroring the slow collapse his body could no longer fight. Neil McCarthy died on February 6, 1985, in Fordingbridge, Hampshire, at just 52 years old from motor neurone disease. He had no children and left behind a career cut short by illness rather than age. His estimated net worth at the time of death was approximately $300,000, a modest legacy for a man whose screen presence felt so overwhelming. William Squire as Thomas. Thomas, the calm, intelligent, and quietly authoritative figure in Where Eagles Dare, was played by William Squire. At 51 years old, he brought a sense of restraint and experience to the role, embodying a man who understood war without needing to dominate it. His performance grounded the story, offering composure amid chaos. William Squire was born on April 29, 1917, in Neath, Glamorgan, Wales. There are no records of hardship in his early life. Instead, he grew up with stability and direction. From an early age, his voice and bearing suggested a natural gravitas that would later define his career. Beginning his professional acting career in 1951, Squire became deeply associated with classical theater, performing at Stratford-upon-Avon and the Old Vic. He even replaced Richard Burton as King Arthur on Broadway. On screen, he was widely respected for roles such as Thomas More in Anne of the Thousand Days, 1969. But his voice reached an entirely different generation when he became the original voice of Gandalf in the 1978 animated The Lord of the Rings. His personal life remained closely tied to the acting world. Squire was first married to actress Betty Dixon, and later married actress Juliet Harmer in 1967. His relationships were private, steady, and largely free of public scandal, reflecting the same discipline he brought to his work. William Squire died on May 3, 1989, in London, at the age of 72. The exact cause of death was not publicly specified. His estimated net worth at the time of his passing was around $400,000, closing the chapter on a life built not on fame, but on consistency, intellect, and a voice that outlived him. More than half a century later, Where Eagles Dare still feels cold, brutal, and unforgettable, but the faces behind it have lived lives far more complicated than the mission they survived on screen. Some rose into legends, others faded quietly, and a few were broken by the years that followed. So which transformation surprised you the most? And which story hit you hardest? Leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more classic film deep dives, and don't forget to like the video if you want to see more then and now stories like this.